Hello everyone and welcome back to the Clutch International Tournament. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Jeffery Xiong. We already checked out one game, but this one it's just a super thriller. It's game 3, Magnus won game 1 and game 2, but this one it's really awesome. I chose it because of one particular move that I really enjoyed, and I think you're gonna enjoy it as well. But we'll see when we get to it. So without further ado, let's check it out. Can Xiong bounce back in the match, or will Magnus continue his onslaught? So knight to f3. Magnus opens with the reti. We have knight f3, c5, and now e4, the best kind of reti, transposing into the Sicilian defense. We have d6, and now bishop to b5 check, going for the Rosolimo. We have bishop d7 blocking, captures, and the knight captures on d7. And here Magnus just castles. So this is nothing fancy. This has all been played before. Knight f6, developing while attacking a pawn here. Rook e1 defending, and now rook to c8. We have c3, Magnus prepares to strike in the center, and now e6, preparing to develop the dark square bishop, and of course castle to safety. So d4, we have c captures on d4, c captures, and d5 now. Asking, do you want to trade here or advance your pawn in the center? If you don't advance the pawn, you don't really get to claim any sort of advantage with white, so you do have to go for e5. Knight to e4, and now knight b to d2. Preparing to capture and then win a pawn after captures and captures, so black always captures on d2 here. We have captures on d2, and now this is the reason why I chose this game. Bishop captures on d2 is the move that has always been played here, but and it does make sense. Why would you capture with the queen and block the development of your own dark square bishop? But this is exactly what Magnus does, and it is one of the reasons why I chose this game. And it is already, as of move 12, that we have a completely new game. Now, what's the idea behind queen d2? Obviously, you've blocked your own dark square bishop. Without developing it, you cannot develop your rook. The point is, you want to go queen f4 to g4, and then create all sorts of nasty threats towards the black king, as the center is static, so black will not be able to get any pieces to the king side. The knight is unable to join the defense, rook very unlikely, the bishop also not so much, so it will be tough for black to defend. However, this is not a bad position for black. It's just a new position, and well, Xiong will have to make decisions as he makes the moves. So bishop to e7, he prepares the castle, and queen to f4 now, as planned. We have castles, and now queen to g4, making room for the bishop to be developed to h6. So rook to e8, making room for bishop to f8. It will be a valuable defender of the g7 pawn, and now just h4. Magnus wants to play h5, and so on. So queen to c7, you don't really have any other moves that are like active or important here. You just have to play a very passive position, and these are the kinds of positions that I really hate playing. For example, with black, if white gets a d4 e5 and I have to defend with no pieces to actually help defend my king. And now bishop to f8, of course, is always possible. You can play this preemptively, king to h8, getting out of this getting out of the g file, also a possibility. Xiong goes for queen to c7. He wants to bring the queen over to c2 and then help out with the defense with the queen. So bishop to h6, Magnus forces him to react. Now you either play g6 or bishop to f8. Bishop to f8, it does seem to be a more natural move for you to play, since you've prevented checkmate and you haven't created any additional weaknesses. But Xiong goes for g6. Now, I'm sure there's a reason for this, but it doesn't look natural to me. I mean, bishop to f8 is a very natural square for the bishop if you want to guard the g7 pawn, and also now you've just created a weakness for white to attack. But okay, queen to f4 now, going after the f7 pawn. Now the plan is the knight will come to g5 and you will put pressure on f7. We have queen to c2, now again with the idea of queen f5, just offering a queen trade, but now Magnus goes g4, he doesn't allow it. And now black has to figure out a different way on how to approach this. Now, while you could grab a pawn here, it doesn't really do all that much, since white can just win it back whenever white wants, and you don't really want to allow this. So b6, now black is preparing to capture on b2, but now Magnus also just goes b3. So just b3, and now comes, and also, yeah, I forgot to mention, like here in this position, like if you want to offer a trade with bishop to f8 with the idea that you want to get some pieces away from the attack, it actually fails miserably to knight to g5. Now the f7 pawn is under attack. You no longer have rook to f8, so you have to defend with rook to e7, but now your rook here is undefended, so now rook 8 to c1 just wins the game. You have to move the queen and you lose the rook, so not possible. So that's why b6 prepares to capture on b2 with b3, and now bishop to a3. Preparing to get both rooks into the game. Also now you will have the e7 square for your rook to help out with the defense of the pawn. But also what black wants to do is play queen here, put the rook here, and put some pressure on the f2 pawn. So king g2, Magnus improves the position of the king before starting an attack, and now queen b2 with the idea of getting the rook over to c2. But now knight to g5. Now the f7 pawn is under attack. You cannot go to f8, so rook to e7, and now rook 8 to d1. Just continuing development, adding another defender to the pawn here, and you don't really care about the a2 pawn as you're all about the attack this game. So we have rook to c2, of course putting pressure on f2. For the moment you don't really have a threat since the queen is defending the pawn, but it is a much more active square for the rook. So rook to e3 by Magnus. He wants to play the rook to f3 to add another attacker to the f7 pawn and also another defender to the f2 pawn. And Xiong doesn't allow this. Rook to c3, but now h5. It was bound to happen at some point. And here queen to c2. Once again, preparing queen to f5 after maybe this trade happens. So the g pawn moves, but now black's position is completely lost. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the winning move for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this idea, as it's not easy to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's either rook captures on c3 or knight captures on h7. Both moves are basically the same idea, so you either capture on c3 first and then on h7, or on h7 first and then on c3. Magnus captured on c3 first, the queen is under attack, so you have to capture, and now comes knight captures on h7. And it comes with a most wonderful idea that after king, if you don't capture this, you're just dead lost. There's nothing to be done here. So king captures, and now the star move, bishop to g5. Now attacking the rook, and if you move the rook, then queen captures on f7 is completely winning. So king to g8, you have to add a defender here, but now just bishop captures on e7. We have bishop captures on e7, and now rook to c1. After the queen moves, the rook is coming to c8. So everything is connecting perfectly. Queen back to b4, and now rook to c8 with check. If you move the king, it's not all that impressive. If you go here, then the f7 pawn falls, so you have to go here. But then h6 check, and again, it's not fun. Queen captures here, king captures here, and now king to g3, preparing to deliver the final blow. And if you block this, let's say with knight to f8, then rook to c1, coming to rook to h1, and it's a game over. So after rook to c8, we have knight to f8 blocking, but now h6. And now the threat is, if you try something like queen to b5, then the point is you have to go into this endgame, which will be winning for white. h7 check. The king has to go away, either capture, and then queen captures on f7 happens, or king g7, and then you bring a queen into the game with check, captures, and only then queen captures on f7. And now the point is, after any move that black makes, so let's say queen to e2, you can either capture here, or you can go for something like queen captures on g6, win some pawns first, and then either follow it up by a similar idea, or black can now trade queens. But even though black has a bishop and knight for a rook, you will easily win the queen side pawns. You will easily win this pawn, and you're just going to be much better and easily winning. So after h6, Xiong played g5 as the bishop is guarding this. So hopefully now you can win this, but it still doesn't work. So for the last time, feel free to pause the video and find the winning blow for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the same idea again. Yes, it is h7 for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, and that's just it. So now you don't have a move. If you capture, then queen captures on f7 is winning. So king to g7, but again, h8 with queen. We have king captures on h8, and now queen captures on f7. Xiong captured on d4, but now Magnus goes for rook captures on f8. He goes into this queen's endgame, but as you'll see, it is not very... well, it's no longer a thriller of a game. So bishop captures, we have queen captures on f8 with check, king h7, and now a few checks to pick up some pawns with tempo. So queen f7 check, king has to move, now comes queen to h5 check, the king has to go to the g file, king g7, now the g5 pawn falls with check, so queen captures on g5 with check, h7, and now queen to e7 with check, king h8, and now queen to f6 check, king to h7, and finally queen captures on e6, where both of the passed pawns are nicely defended, so black doesn't really have a lot of counterplay here. If you try some checks, queen e4 check, king g3, queen d3 check, after f3 there are no more checks, so you are free to start checking and pushing your passed pawn. So Xiong tried queen to d1, but Magnus just goes queen to f5 check, he makes room for his passed pawn, king g8 and e6, and it was in this position that Jeffery Xiong resigned the game, and Magnus takes a 3-0 lead in the match. Here, again, you don't really have any checks, queen f7 check followed by e7, e8 is coming, and that's just it. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it because of, well, especially because of this position. Not bishop captures, but rather queen captures, probably something Magnus had at home in his home laboratory at some point, thought, oh, okay, this might be an interesting idea. If black's not careful, I might be able to develop a fierce attack, which is exactly what happened here. And if you play the Rossolimo, you know, black might defend in a similar way. You will know some ideas for how to use the attack. So yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Jonas Helston, Bork Listener, Charlie Hill, Garrett Graham, and Bradley Varley for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Clutch International. We'll be checking up on PogChamps, continuing the Morphy saga, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and so on. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.